Tucker Carlson is now convinced that the coronavirus has led to the complete elimination of our constitutional rights. Let's watch his rant on that.
The other day, prosecutors in New Jersey charged 9 people for daring to participate in a Jewish wedding in their backyard. A few months ago, that would have made the news. For 250 years, Americans have enjoyed the unfettered right to practice their faith as they choose. Now they don't. It happened overnight. Last month, Christians across the country were legally prohibited from celebrating Easter in their own churches. The national media barely noted it. How exactly is this happening? Well, it turns out that's not clear. Strangely, not very many people have asked. Politicians have no right to do any of this. They cannot make it illegal for people to go to religious services. The Constitution of the United States expressly prohibits that. The words could not be clearer. The First Amendment explicitly prevents government from making any law that inhibits the exercise of religious faith. That's not a detail or a footnote. It is a cornerstone of our history and of our legal system. Millions of people, probably your ancestors, fled to this country from around the world precisely because our Bill of Rights gave them this guarantee. It's why this country was founded. And in a moment, it's gone. How? Where did politicians get the authority to do this? Because some elderly, power-drunk epidemiologist told them to do it? That's not how our system works. It can't work that way. Occasionally, you hear someone complain about this. Some lonely civil libertarian will fret that we may be on a slippery slope toward losing our rights. If only. We're already there. We've slid to the bottom of that slope. Our rights are gone. No one has explained how politicians are allowed to do this. Where's the authority come from? How can they override the Constitution? Nobody seems to care. They're too afraid. But if you think this moment is scary, consider what might come next. Now that we've ceded all authority in the country to our political leaders, what can't they do? What are the limits to their power? That's not a theoretical question. It's not an argument over philosophy or political theory. It is the most practical possible question. The answer will define where this country goes next. What can't politicians do in the name of public health? As it stands, politicians won't let people worship or work or go to school or see their aging parents. They place the nation under house arrest. That's happening today, right now. But let's say we all get more afraid. What then? What couldn't they start doing? Could they intern people?
I mean, listen, I'm sympathetic to questions about civil liberties because I'm as civil libertarian as it gets. But I think what he's doing is a little ridiculous here because he's trying to set this up as like, oh, the nefarious government is coming to take away your rights. And it's like, dude, that was NSA spying in the Patriot Act. That's when your rights were taken away. Your rights were taken away when George Bush started torturing people and locking them up indefinitely. Your rights were taken away then. Your rights are taken away when we wage illegal and offensive wars against countries that didn't attack us. This is when your rights were taken away. When habeas corpus was suspended, this is when your rights are taken away. You know, due process. Let's see what's going on in Guantanamo Bay, which is still open, by the way, still holding people indefinitely. I mean, that's taking away rights. So wake up, dog. It's been happening for a long time, and that's the government doing it with nefarious motives. Now, in the case of this lockdown, the thing on the screen says civil liberties at risk. There's a pandemic, bro. Like, it's not like the government is doing stay-at-home orders because it's some sort of nefarious power grab. No, this is a rare instance where nobody actually wants this to be happening. The government doesn't want it to be happening. Big business doesn't want it to be happening. Small business doesn't want it to be happening. The people don't want it to be happening. But there's a pandemic. So people are like, all right, I guess we got to stay home as much as possible. Now, if Tucker Carlson wants to have a conversation about what the enforcement mechanism is for a stay-at-home order, I think that's a reasonable conversation to have. So the government breaking up a religious funeral, he's saying, well, it's expressed in the Constitution that they can't do that. They can't infringe on religious liberty. Okay, but there's a pandemic, and the concern is public safety, and you'll have one person with COVID, and all of a sudden you got 212 people with COVID because there were thousands of people at the Jewish funeral. So what do you want us to do? Let it spread. Yeah, screw it. Screw the frontline workers who got to work on these people. What do you want us to do? So I think there's an interesting conversation to be had. Okay, does a stay-at-home order mean the cops just show up and say, listen, you guys got to break it up? But there's no enforcement mechanism of you don't go to prison, there's no fine, or do you have a fine, or do you have a day in prison? Like, there is a conversation to be had as to what's the proper enforcement mechanism, and I think most people fall on the side of just have the cops show up and break them up. Don't go over the top, don't write them a ticket, don't lock them up in prison, just have the cops show up to say, this can't happen, you're going to have to break up, and that's the end of the conversation. So, I think that's where most people would fall in the conversation, but almost nobody would say, okay, just do nothing and let everybody continue to get COVID and let's put the frontline workers at risk and let's put these individuals at risk. Almost nobody would say that. You want to know why? Because he's making this debate something it's not. He's making this debate like the nefarious government is taking away your rights and, they're using this crisis, they're using this pandemic to do what they've always wanted to do. No, Tucker, that conversation is just for the economic response to this, which you didn't bring up, interestingly. See, that's the real concern. Oh yeah, they exploited a pre-existing agenda, that's for damn sure, but that was to give $5 trillion to the multinational corporations at the behest of Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, with no strings attached and no oversight, as people are barely getting by and are living on crumbs and the government's barely helping them at all, in many cases not at all. So, you're concerned about, oh my God, what about our rights? Oh my God, look at how they're screwing us. You're focusing on the wrong part of it because the stay-at-home orders are genuine and sincere in that, like, hey, let's not die from this thing. That really is the concern on that front. But if you want to talk about, oh my God, look at the terrible decisions that are made, look at how they're exploiting a pre-existing agenda, that's for the bailout conversation. That's for the stimulus conversation. Because that's where they are doing what Tucker is accusing them of doing here. That's the government being totally captured by corporations and doing their bidding and screwing over the people in the process and letting corporations loot the treasury. But see, he flipped it. He's not focusing on the economic conversation at all. He's focusing on the social conversation. He's focusing on the civil liberties conversation. So, listen, again, there is a reasonable conversation to be had about where do you draw the line for an enforcement mechanism? Do you just have cops show up and break people up, or is there a fine or whatever? There's a conversation to be had there, and maybe Tucker falls more on the side of, the government shouldn't enforce this strictly because it's not in their purview and they really shouldn't have the right to do that. Okay, fair enough. But I think he's really overstating the nefarious angle of the social impact here because nobody wants this, Tucker. The government doesn't want to force people to stay home. Big business doesn't, small business doesn't, regular people don't. Like, we're all just coping with a terrible situation as well as we possibly can. And one of the things in a pandemic is, all right, let's try to stay as far apart as we can. Let's try to quarantine as much as possible. Yes, I don't want you to get locked up in prison if you go for a walk in the park, of course. But I honestly think that those situations are super rare. And there is a real danger, like he brings up the religious funerals. Listen, there's a real danger. We saw what was happening in Williamsburg in New York, where you had thousands of people inches away in the streets. If Tucker's, position on that is, you can't do anything because that's the government being tyrannical. Not only do I think you're wrong, I think that's idiotic. Do nothing, say nothing. People were accusing Mayor de Blasio of being anti-Semitic because he said to the Jewish community and to all communities, we're going to enforce these, the social distancing rules. People were like, how dare you? They're Jewish, and you said the word Jewish, anti-Semite. It's like, stop with the reaching. Stop with the reaching. The real concern about civil liberties is that they're gone in the Patriot Act, and then the Patriot Act was re-upped about 1,000 times, and spying powers were expanded. So the NSA has taken away your rights. The Patriot Act has taken away your rights. The Guantanamo Bay and torture and suspending habeas corpus and endless wars, all that stuff has taken away our rights. But to mildly enforce social distancing during a pandemic, that's not a problem. That's not tyrannical. That's actually really, really reasonable. So, and I think it's very telling that that's Tucker's focus here. That's his focus. It's not, oh my God, look at what they did with the economic response, where it was a reverse Robin Hood again, where they stole from the poor and they gave to the rich. He's not talking about that screwing people over. He's talking about, God forbid, the police enforce some social distancing rules or break up a religious funeral because people are going to die if they don't. It's just, I think his concern is in the wrong place, and he actually looks kind of silly in these rants.